This is a reading from Modern Saints, Their Lives and Their Faces by Anne Ball. 5. St. John Neumann. St. John Neumann, CSSR, John Nepomucene Neumann, 1811 to 1860, born in Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, and died in the United States at the age of 48. If you have ever attended a Catholic elementary school or participated in the 40 hours devotion in a Catholic parish in America, then you have felt the effects of the work of a shy immigrant priest, John Nepomucene Neumann. He came to America as a penniless seminarian in 1836 and died only 24 years later after accomplishing more than many men accomplish in twice that period. At the time of his death, he was the 4th Bishop of Philadelphia. The life of this saint is the perfect demonstration that sanctity is open to all. There were no miraculous events during his lifetime. Instead, he took the ordinary path of simply following his vocation with all his strength and heart and with perfect constancy. John was born March 28, 1811, in the village of Prashatic in Bohemia, now Czechoslovakia. His father was a Bavarian who owned a small stocking weaving business, and his mother was a native of the village where John was born. John was a quiet boy, the bookworm type. His hobbies were botany and astronomy, and as a young child, he thought often of becoming a scientist. At 20, when a choice of life had to be made, he was torn between the desire to be a doctor and the thought that he should become a priest. The priesthood seemed almost unattainable. The seminary would accept only 20 of the 90 applicants, and John had no influential friends. After John talked it over with his parents, his mother told him, "Well, John, if you really are thinking of the priesthood, it's only fair to yourself to try." Without much hope, John made application to the seminary, and to his surprise was accepted. He studied hard and made a good scholastic record there, learning to speak 6 languages and becoming familiar with 2 others. John's linguistic skills would be one of the greatest assets of his life. Because of this, John was offered an excellent government post. Neither the seminary rector nor the 2 dignitaries who had come to offer the job could understand his quiet refusal. John had seen where he thought he was needed, in pioneer America, where the European immigrant Catholics needed a priest who could speak their languages and hear their confessions. The 3 men found it hard to accept the fact that John would willingly give up the life of luxury and honor they offered and choose instead to travel to the difficult life in America. As John had completed his studies, he awaited anxiously for ordination. The bishop was ill, and the date was put off indefinitely. Thinking that perhaps an American bishop would ordain him, he wrote several letters offering to come and serve in America. He did not receive a single reply. John determined on a bold course. He would make his appeal to an American bishop in person. John packed a small bag and made his way, largely on foot, to the port of Havre, where he embarked in the spring of 1836. After 40 days at sea, he arrived at the docks in Manhattan. In an interview with Bishop Jean Dubois, he learned that an invitation to him had been mailed, but he had left before its arrival. The bishop ordained John on June 25, 1836, and sent him to a parish of 900 square miles near Buffalo. In this mosquito-infested swampland, there were about 400 widely scattered Catholic families, German, Irish, French, and Indian. Later asked what he had done in Buffalo, John smilingly replied, "Walk." He walked throughout his large parish, sometimes 10 to 20 miles a day, carrying his mass kit in a pack on his back. Father Neumann had a special love for the children, and he kept his pockets filled with rock candy as an inducement for them to learn their catechism. Many of the children whom he met were growing up speaking a hopeless mixture of German and English and had no opportunity for any form of education. This need inspired John to begin one of his favorite projects, his schools. John's parish work, though not easy, gradually took on a bit of routine. Still, there were exciting moments. For example, the time he was caught and nearly hanged by masked bandits, or the time he was almost shot in the back by a drunken mule skinner. Fatigue at last caught up with the young priest. On one of his trips, Father Neumann passed out in the woods, where he was found by some Indians and carried back to his hut. This incident prompted a friend to offer a horse for the longer journeys. Father Neumann was short and had to coax the beast close to a stump or fence in order to mount it. On one occasion, he mistakenly put the wrong foot in the stirrup. The horse started off, and the little priest hastily flung himself into the saddle. Imagine his chagrin when he realized that the horse's tail was in place where his head ought to be. Luckily, two nearby workmen were able to halt the steed and return Father to a more conventional position. Although Father Neumann recognized that his work on the frontier was needed, he found there was something lacking in his own spiritual life. He felt he needed the company and advice of other priests, and determined to join a religious order. He had met a Redemptorist and was impressed by what he had learned of this order. With the grudging permission of his bishop, who hated to lose such a good priest, John left by stagecoach to join the Redemptorists, where they were still struggling in Pittsburgh to make the first permanent foundation in America. Here he was received as a novice and made his vows in 1842. During his first years as a Redemptorist, Father Neumann was stationed in a number of places. At the age of 35, he was appointed Superior General of the Order in America. John was not popular in this post for a number of reasons. He was young and relatively new to the order. His personality was unobtrusive. Most of all, his policy of using all his available personnel to staff existing foundations instead of splintering the group and making new foundations was not what the eager members of the order wanted. John's sensitive soul smarted under the criticism, and he humbly begged his superiors to relieve him of his post. At last, after 2 years, he was allowed to resign and become a simple religious again. His days back in the ranks did not last long, however, for in January of 1851, he was again made a superior. He was chosen to head the group of Redemptorists at St. Alphonsus in Baltimore. No one knows how the rumor started, but soon people were whispering that John was to be named bishop. He was confessor to the Archbishop of Baltimore, and one day the Archbishop jokingly remarked how nice John would look dressed as a bishop. John was stunned. He did not want to be appointed to an office which he feared would keep him from his people. He asked his friends to pray that he not be made a bishop, and also went so far as to ask his superiors to plead for this. One of the Redemptorists, a friend of the Pope, was told, "The Holy Father has his own reasons." One afternoon, upon entering his room, John noticed something lying on an open book, a bishop's ring and pectoral cross. When he asked who had been to his room, he was told the Archbishop had come to see him while he was out. John was consecrated a bishop on his 41st birthday. Father Neumann was named Bishop of Philadelphia. He chose as his motto, "Passion of Christ, strengthen me," for he had no illusions as to the type of work needed in this still largely mission area. Within weeks of his arrival, he had visited every church and religious establishment in the city, and when the spring thaws opened the back roads, he set off for visitation in the country. Even as a bishop, John was extraordinarily active and accessible. Although at first his new diocese looked askance at his frayed collars and high country boots, they soon grew to love him for his kindness and simplicity. Probably one of the main reasons Rome had chosen John was his language skill, so needed in this diocese, thronged with immigrants. By this time, he spoke 12 languages fluently. The story is told of an old Irish grandmother who went to Bishop Neumann for confession. In fast Gaelic, she rattled off her sins. Then, after listening to the bishop's wise advice, she left the confessional exclaiming in Gaelic, "Thanks be to God, we finally have an Irish bishop." In his 8 years as bishop, John gave his diocese 80 new churches. In the first National Council of the American Bishops, he helped map out a plan of Catholic education for the whole United States. In his diocese, he set the goal of a Catholic school for every parish. At his installation in 1852, Philadelphia had only 2 Catholic grammar schools. 8 years later, it had 100. Bishop Neumann brought several religious orders to the diocese to help in the work of education, which he considered so vital. John wanted to begin the 40 hours devotion in his diocese, but there were objections to his plan. No American diocese had begun this devotion, for the presence of the violently anti-Catholic know-nothings meant a constant danger of sacrilege. At last, following an interior guidance, Bishop Neumann did begin the devotion. The faithful came in droves, and there was no notice by the know-nothings. Other dioceses quickly followed. After becoming a bishop, John was not obligated to observe the vow of poverty made as a Redemptorist. However, his love for religious poverty was so strong that he observed it to the end of his life. What little money and material things he could claim as his own, he gave away to any beggar who asked. What he kept for himself became little better than rags. One day, a fellow priest chided him. "Bishop, you look shabby. Today is Sunday. Have the goodness to change your clothes." He replied, "What do you want me to do? I have no others." Since New Year's Day of 1860, the bishop had been feeling a little weak and dizzy, but he told no one. On the 5th, when he went down to dinner, he had trouble recognizing an old friend who was there. When asked how he felt, he admitted that he felt a little odd, but that a walk in the fresh air would do him good. Then he added a rather strange remark. "A man must always be ready, for death comes when and where God wills it." Bishop John Neumann collapsed in the street that afternoon after suffering a stroke. Loving hands carried him into a nearby house, but he was dead before the arrival of the priest so quickly summoned. Before his funeral, the largest one Philadelphia had ever seen, thousands filed past Bishop Neumann's open coffin. Many wept openly. Some, however, had to smile. They had never before seen their bishop resting, and he was dressed in new clothes. At rest, but still working, Bishop Neumann was scarcely placed in his tomb before many were flocking there to ask his intercession. Reports of prayers answered began to accumulate, and a canonical investigation of his virtue was begun 26 years after his death. He was beatified by Pope John XXIII in 1963 and canonized by Pope Paul VI in 1977. This is a miniature of him when he was a child. And the caption says, "This miniature shows St. John Neumann as a child." Miniaturists were careful artists who usually tried to make a portrait exactly resemble the subject. And here he is as an adult. The mitre and crozier have been added to this old photograph of St. John Neumann. Bishop Neumann gave the Diocese of Philadelphia 80 new churches in only 8 years and began the Catholic school system and the 40 hours devotion in the United States.